What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be looking forward towards the 2025 fantasy football season. I know 2024 just wrapped up, but this video is for the fantasy sickos who are already looking towards next year. So this is going to be my way too early top 12 wide receiver rankings. Obviously, these are kind of like a rough draft here. Still a lot of things to play out, free agency, the NFL draft, a lot of time, before now and draft season, but I just thought this would be fun. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Which guys would you have higher or lower? Would love to hear the feedback, and I'll make sure to get back to you. We're going to start off here in tier one with my wide receiver one, and I only have one guy in this tier. I don't think this is shocking. It is Ja'Marr Chase. I think he is going to be the consensus wide receiver one heading into next season. He's coming off a monster year, was the clear-cut wide receiver one in points per game, averaged 23.7 PPR points per game. He was number one in targets, red zone targets, receptions, receiving yards, yards after catch, and touchdowns. Had the triple crown at the wide receiver position. He's attached to Joe Burrow. Once again, this is going to be a top tier offense. Ja'Marr Chase, pretty clearly my wide receiver one. Now, my wide receiver two, I actually debated between having this guy in tier one and tier two. I ended up going with Puka Nacua in tier two. Now, I think I'm going to be much higher on Puka than consensus. In some of like the early rankings I've seen, he's in like the wide receiver 4, 5, 6 area, and I don't think that's crazy. But Puka is going to be my number two here, and I did strongly consider having him in that Chase tier. And I honestly think of like the public perception was him as like the clear-cut number two, that I probably would have him there. But the fact that Ja'Marr Chase is just going to be viewed as the clear-cut top option, I ended up having Puka in tier two. When we look at his 9 full games, he played 11 games this season, but 2 of them he left with an injury, or 1 left with an injury, and then the other one he left early because he was ejected. In his 9 full games, he averaged 21.8 PPR points, and he did that while only scoring 3 touchdowns. So if you look at his full games, the lack of touchdown production, like wide receiver one overall is 100% in his range of outcomes. If he actually hit in the touchdown department, like in his healthy games, he could have had a higher point per game average than Ja'Marr Chase. Like that was a possibility this season. He was number one in yards per route run. You look at the offense, as long as Matthew Stafford is back, Puka's like the clear-cut top dog. Cooper Kupp's definitely taken that step back. I think Puka is going to be a great value if he kind of holds where it looks like people are having him ranked right now. So Puka Nacua is going to be my number two, and I feel very good about him heading into next year. Also in tier two, I have CeeDee Lamb as my wide receiver three. Kind of a disappointing season. He fell from 23.7 points per game in 2023 down to 17.6 here in 2024. It wasn't a great year. It didn't start off too hot, even when Dak was healthy. He actually did a pretty good job of being a relevant wide receiver one with Dak out, which I guess was somewhat surprising. Not that he wasn't going to produce, but like the production was pretty similar, if not better in certain weeks than even when Dak was healthy. But I think we look at CeeDee Lamb. If Dak is back week one, which he should be, he's proven he can be like this elite, high-end ceiling wide receiver one. I don't see why he doesn't bounce back to like in contention for that wide receiver one overall spot. And then my last guy in tier two, I think most people are going to have Justin Jefferson higher than this. Most are probably going to have him at wide receiver two, and I think that's very fair. Talent-wise, I think he totally belongs up there. He had 18.7 points per game this season. I think the biggest question for Jefferson is just what is this offense going to look like heading into next year? It's kind of a similar thing to what we were looking at heading into 2024, where we just had no idea what the quarterback situation was going to be. Was it going to be J.J. McCarthy? Was it going to be Sam Darnold? Whichever one of those guys did play, was the passing production going to be there to support a guy like Justin Jefferson to high-end wide receiver one production? And I think we saw this year, like, it was a pretty good offensive situation. Like, we didn't know Sam Darnold was going to be so good, but he threw for over 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns. Like, that's enough volume, enough touchdown upside to support a guy like Justin Jefferson. And he had a nice year, 18.7 points per game. That's very strong. But if I'm being honest, if you told me before the season that Darnold was going to have 4,300 plus yards, 35 passing touchdowns, I would have thought Justin Jefferson would have broken into like that 20 plus point per game area. And I think when we're looking forward to next year, we're either going to be in a spot where they're running it back with Sam Darnold, which you're probably expecting similar production, or maybe they move on, trade him. Maybe they go with JJ McCarthy here to be their quarterback one. And then I think expecting those numbers is probably a little bit lofty, in his first season as a potential starter. So I just think he had a season where he didn't hit that 20 point per game number. I don't see the quarterback position being better next year. Now, he could obviously overperform on the same amount of volume, from the quarterback position, but I think this is a fair spot. Obviously, a super talented wide receiver, and wide receiver 4 should not be seen as a slight to him. Now, moving into tier 3, really fun tier here. I'm going to start off with Nico Collins. 2023 had his big breakout, 17.4 points per game. 2024, it looked like he was going to be just a complete league winner, an absolute monster. Started off the season super hot, went on IR, ended up finishing with 17.6 points per game. Not terrible, but just not where you were expecting, after the first 3-4 weeks of the season. Overall, this was a down year from CJ Stroud, this Texans offense. He threw for 300 fewer yards and 3 fewer touchdowns in the previous season, despite playing 2 more games. Their offensive line was in contention for just like dead worst unit in the NFL. I think Collins has the upside to be a 20-plus point per game guy. If we see a bounce back from Stroud, they bolster the offensive line. I think Nico Collins is going to be a great pick heading into next year. Now, my wide receiver 6, probably the player I am most excited to talk about here, Brian Thomas Jr. As a rookie, he finished as the wide receiver 12 in points per game. He's someone who I was pretty high on heading into the season, but I had no idea he was going to be, the absolute monster he was, especially down the stretch. Like, he ended the season on an absolute tear. In his last 6 games, he averaged 22.9 PPR points per game, had 10 targets and 85 total yards in all 6 of those matchups. And he did that with Mac Jones. It's not like he was doing it on some sort of top offense in an amazing situation. He was doing it with a backup quarterback. I think if you get Trevor Lawrence back, however you feel about T-Law, I'm probably higher on him than consensus, but I do think he's obviously an upgrade over Mac Jones. Liam Cohen right now at the time that I'm recording this is the betting favorite to get the head coaching job. If they get Liam Cohen, have T-Law healthy heading into next year, like, the ceiling is going to be crazy for BTJ, and I might end up having him ranked higher, once we're getting closer into the season. My wide receiver 7 is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. There are so many studs at the wide receiver position. This does feel low for him. He's coming off a great season, 18.6 PPR points per game. He was top 5 in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. I guess we'll see what the situation here is with Ben Johnson. Does he finally take a head coaching job, or does he end up sticking around? The last 3 seasons from Amon-Ra have been super productive. 16.7, 20.7, 18.6 points per game. If you wanted him higher, I wouldn't, push back a ton. I do think BTJ is interesting, just a little bit of a different type of wide receiver. The fact that he had such an amazing close to the season, I do think he has like that 20-plus point per game upside. But honestly, like, all the dudes in this tier, I think are in a similar range. And then to close out this tier, I have Malik Nabers. As a rookie, he was the wide receiver 7 in points per game at 18.2 PPR points per game. He was number 1 in targets per game by over a full target, so commanding an insane amount of volume, first in target share. I think he's in kind of an interesting spot moving forward because he really got by as a rookie due to the volume. They were force feeding him. He had so many opportunities. The efficiency wasn't crazy. The touchdown upside wasn't great. But I think in the future, probably going to cool off on the volume a little bit. Like, I don't think he's going to be the clear-cut, target leader every single season. But I think he can make up for that with some big plays, some touchdown upside that I just don't think was there on this offense with the quarterback play he was getting. Like, putting up 18-plus points per game with his crop of quarterback is insanely impressive. The big question heading into next year is just, what is the quarterback position actually going to look like? Is there going to be a significant change? They currently have the 3rd overall pick. I think most people view it as a clear top 2 with Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, however you want to, rank those guys. But if they're going 1 and 2, are the Giants punting on this quarterback class? Are they going to try to trade into one of those top spots? And are those guys going to be able to support him right away? There are some question marks, but I mean, Nabers is an 18-point per game rookie. I'm going to bet on him pretty much regardless of what his quarterback looks like. And then moving into tier 4, I have T. Higgins here as my number 9. Now, Higgins is kind of in a fun spot here because we don't really know what his future is going to look like. He could be back with the Bengals. He might be on a different roster. But we saw him as a wide receiver 2 behind Jamar Chase, put up 18.5 PPR points per game. He was an absolute beast. Now, some of that was obviously due to the Bengals defense being so bad. They were in a lot of these shootout games. The offense had a lot of passing volume, but you still need to produce on it, and he 100% did. I think if he's back with the Bengals, he's going to be ranked in this like back end wide receiver 1 range. But I think he's also in a spot where he could hold on or maybe even be ranked higher if he goes to a different team. I think the most notable landing spot would be the Chargers. Like if you pair him with Justin Herbert, I'm going to be so recklessly high on T. Higgins. I also think there are some interesting options out there. I think a Patriots landing spot previous years hasn't seemed all that great, but being the clear wide receiver 1 for Drake May, who I believe in, I think would be a fun landing spot. So T. Higgins coming off a career year, we'll see where he ends up, but I think regardless of landing spot, if he's getting like an average to above average, destination, I think he's going to be in like this top 12 range. And then also in tier 4, I have AJ Brown. Not overly high on AJ Brown, and it's really not due to his ability. I think he is a true like top tier wide receiver. I think in a different situation on a different team, he'd be in contention for wide receiver 1 overall. But I feel like we just kind of know what he is on this Eagles offense. In 3 seasons with the Eagles, he has put up 17.6, 17 and 16.7 points per game. This is not going to be a high volume passing attack. You have other competent weapons, specifically Devonta Smith, also Dallas Goedert in there. So he's just never going to be a guy who's an absolute target monster. He's not going to be racking up an insane amount of volume, which is going to cap his upside. He's going to be efficient. He's going to have the big plays. But just in this current situation, I don't see how I rank him much higher than this. I do think like the highest I'm going to be able to get is probably wide receiver 9. Like if T. Higgins doesn't get a great landing spot, AJ Brown will probably move up to that number 9 spot, but I really can't see myself moving him ahead of like Nabers, Amon-Ra, the guys in those tier, because they've honestly just flashed upside that AJ Brown has not. Like as a rookie, Malik Nabers has a better season than every single one of AJ Brown's seasons when it comes to his point per game number. Now moving into my 5th and final tier, also kind of a fun spot, I have Drake London as my wide receiver 11. We finally saw that year 3 leap, went from 10.5 points per game to 10.9 in his first 2 years. Obviously a terrible quarterback play. And then that jumped all the way up to 16.5. I think Michael Penix at the quarterback position is pretty encouraging for him. In 3 games with Penix at quarterback, he went 5 for 59, 7 for 106, and then 10 for 187 and 2 touchdowns. Not saying Penix was perfect. He's a little bit inaccurate at times. The mechanics, a little bit wonky on certain throws, but he can make some very, very tough plays. So I think, what he maybe lacks in the consistency, he can make up for in just having great arm talent and being able to make some really tight window throws. We saw Drake London be the beneficiary of a lot of those. So I think this is going to be a fun pairing moving forward, and I would view Drake London as a wide receiver 1. Then my wide receiver 12, I know I said top 12, actually going to go top 13 because I didn't want to leave one of these guys off. My wide receiver 12 is going to be Ladd McConkey. In the last 7 games of the season, really kind of broke out, averaged 18.7 points per game, had 80 plus yards in 6 of those 7 matchups. I also just think we could see the training wheels off of this offense in 2025. The Chargers had the 5th fewest pass attempts per game. Kind of insane for like a Justin Herbert-led offense, someone who I view as a top 5 quarterback. But I think you just look at the rest of the weapons. Like outside of Ladd McConkey, there's not a lot going on. The wide receiver position, not good. I know Quentin Johnson just had a great game, but the full season sample size, not great. Tight end position, like he was making it work with Will Dissly, Stone Smart, but still like not some sort of elite unit. Don't really have pass catchers out of the backfield. So they weren't, airing it out. I think if you improve the weapons, could draft a tight end, a wide receiver, whatever it may be. I think if we see the training wheels taken off, Ladd McConkey could really be an absolute monster. And then my final guy here, JSN, going to be my wide receiver 13, really broke out over the second half of the season. In his last 9 games, he averaged 18.2 points per game. I will say Ryan Grubb getting fired is not ideal because he was the guy who came in here, kind of unlocked JSN. He was the offensive coordinator when JSN was balling out. But I think at this point, the toothpaste is kind of out of the tube. Like, I don't think you can see what you saw from JSN and all of a sudden, like, relegate him back to, like, the weird, like, low ADOT guy he was last year, like the screen dude. It just made no sense, the usage that Shane Waldron had. So I think he's going to be relevant. He looks like the wide receiver 1 here for this team, and he is going to close out these rankings as my wide receiver 13. So like I said, if you have any, comments on these rankings, if you have some players who you thought should have made it, let me hear it. Should have been higher, lower, let me know. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.